This video is a first for me for a lot of reasons. For one, it's my first attempt at a longer form critique of a video game. These kinds of videos are more or less the reason I got into YouTube to start. It's also the first JRPG I've beaten on the Switch. I'm always playing older games, like, for example, I played Avernum 3, Ruined World, and Operation Flashpoint Dragon Rising, and I just lost 90% of you. And I guess another interesting first to point out is that this is the first time I've played through Xenoblade Chronicles in its entirety. And in that way, maybe you're also kind of like me. Maybe you played through a little bit of Xenoblade Chronicles when it was released on the Wii, but you never finished it. Maybe you claim to like JRPGs, but let's face it, you're a diet JRPG gamer. You've played a bunch of Final Fantasy games, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Persona 5. The only anime you've ever watched is Cowboy Bebop. Yeah, that's me. And Dragon Ball Z. Others have probably never heard of this game, and maybe they know of Shulk or other characters from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, or maybe you're a diehard XE fan who's
beaten all the super bosses, unlocked level 6 gems, explored every single nook the game has to offer.
Whoever you are, welcome, get cozy, and take a seat. Today, we're going to take a critical look at Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition.
Long ago, the world was nothing more than an endless sea, cloaked in a boundless sky, reaching as far as could possibly be imagined. Then two great titans came into existence, the Bionis and the Mechonis.
The world of Xenoblade Chronicles is a life lived on one of two surfaces, life on the Bionis or life on the Mechonis. Both are these titanic creatures who once waged war against one another in ancient times. After a deadly blow, both creatures were frozen in time. Many, many years later, life finds a way and sprouts from the surface of the Bionis. Various species live on sections of the Bionis, which also act as biomes. You've got bugs, weird rabbits, various fantasy animals that kind of look like real-life animals, but also not really. Then you've got intelligent life, Homs, which are more or less humans, Hyantia, etc. These species live throughout the Bionis, and it's peaceful. Like all good stories, however, hell eventually lets loose. Mechon, which are the supposed denizens of the Mechonis, attack societies on the Bionis. In a hopeless bid similar to the Covenant versus humanity from the Halo series, the people of the Bionis basically don't have a shot at surviving these attacks because not only are there hordes of bloodthirsty sharp metal machines, they're also impervious to traditional weaponry. And because of this, Homs must develop better technology and energy weapons to defend themselves. The opening of Xenoblade Chronicles takes place in Sword Valley, where three rough and cocky Homs prepare to face off against a horde of Mechon. Only this time, the Homs have a secret weapon, the Monado. This mysterious weapon holds the key to defeating the Mechon and preserving the lives of the Homs and those on the Bionis. Wielded by Dunban, the Monado shreds the Mechon, which temporarily saves the people of Bionis. It's during this battle that we also learn the Monado can only be wielded by specific individuals, and worse, that it wears and tears the user's body, which eventually results in Dunban losing the use of his right arm. Fast forward after the battle, we are now in the role of a younger Hom named Shulk. We soon also meet his friends Ryan and Fiora. The three enjoy simple life in Colony 9, a small settlement located on the right leg of the Bionis. Fiora is a cutesy character with big dreams and a value for friendship. Ryan is a brawny, meaty jock with a big mouth. Shulk is a brave and thoughtful protagonist who leads the three. Ryan and Shulk are longtime buddies, and Fiora and Shulk have an unmentioned lovey-dovey attraction to one. It's one of those just quit beating around the bush and tell each other you like each other kind of situations. It's here where we are given our typically JRPG and slow introduction to the game's mechanics and characters. We'll spend some time with Dunban, who's also Fiora's older brother. We'll also meet his comrade Dixon, and also engage with a number of Homs living in the colony. The first few hours of Xenoblade are more or less a tutorial on the game's systems. You'll kill some rabbits, discover side quests, pick up some collectibles that can be turned in for items, you'll kill some squirrels, you'll kill some bugs, discover more side quests, kill more bugs, and run around a lot. I think the simplest way to describe Xenoblade Chronicles is to think of an MMORPG, but without the other players. Massive lands to explore, lots of leveling, ability selection, respawning enemies, and loads of side quests. The gameplay is fine, but we'll get to that. I don't really want to recap the entire story here, but there are a few critical points in the game's introduction that set up the themes and narrative for the remainder of the game, so they are worth mentioning. After tutorialing for a bit, the Mechon attack Colony 9. Shulk takes the Monado and defends the colony. Here we learn the Monado can not only damage Mechon, but also that it can allow its user to see the future. This allows Shulk to see how he or others could die from an enemy's attack. Shulk can use this information to stop the future he saw from happening in his vision, thus allowing him to effectively change the future. It's like Early Edition, you know, that show from like the late 90s, early 2000s, but it's less corny. Wow, probably only like 3% of the people who watch this video will understand that reference. Am I old now? Yeah, I guess I am. Shulk uses the Monado to fend off Mechon, but then a special Mechon with a face shows up, and the Monado also fails to work against this Mechon. Moments later, the story of the game is set in motion as Shulk sees a future where Fiora is killed by this faced Mechon. No matter his efforts, he's unable to stop it, so the Mechon leave Colony 9 with ruin behind them. Shulk has lost his best friend and love interest, and we're left wondering what happens now. Some time passes, and the headstrong, vengeful Shulk has had his life completely changed as he chooses to set off with Ryan to hunt down the faced Mechon, now known as Metalface, and to kill it to avenge Fiora. That's the start of the game. So it's a fairly interesting setup with some ballsy storytelling decisions. Fiora seems to be a fully playable character, but is offed pretty early in the game. The Monado is not the ultimate weapon it's cracked up to be, and life seems pretty hopeless. So from this point on, I'm talking all spoilers all the time. If you don't want the game ruined, leave now. Otherwise, here we go. You've been warned. I want to be pretty clear about things. I like Xenoblade Chronicles for what it is. I don't have nostalgia for it like a lot of people do. I didn't grow up with it. I only played like 10 hours or so back in the day. That said, as I started playing it this time around, at some point, I really just wanted to finish the game for the story. I realize I'm probably going to lose a lot of fans of the game here with that sentence, but for me, I found the combat to be pretty grinding. The side quests felt more or less pointless, but I was so wrapped up in this world that I just had to unravel the mysteries and figure out what's going on, what's the backstory of these characters, what's going on with the Mechonis and the Bionis. Now that's not to say Xenoblade Chronicles doesn't do anything right, far from it. In fact, I'm extremely impressed by a number of things the game does right. I'm just not sold on some of the design choices that, in my opinion, haven't aged very well. So I want to talk about a number of things, and at this point you can use the chapters in the description below to flip to the section that's of interest to you. But we're going to talk about graphics and performance, we're going to talk about gameplay, we're going to talk about music and voice acting, and sort of the end of the video we'll talk about the story and the themes of the game. I kind of hesitate to even approach this part of the discussion under the guise of graphics because, to be honest, I don't really care very much. I like the art style of this game. One of my favorite games of all time is Final Fantasy VI, and look how old this game looks. I still think it looks pretty good, but Hitman Blood Money is one of my favorite games of all time, and it's pretty muddy by today's standards. Sure, there's a difference too between aesthetic and just bad art, like how Chrono Trigger is still very pleasing to the eye, but something like Batman Forever on the Super Nintendo, that hasn't aged very well. Actually, Jacob Geller recently did a video on restoration of art in Resident Evil 4 that's really good, that kind of covers some of these ideas, but you should check that out. The link for that is in the description. So in terms of Xenoblade Chronicles, listen, I'm not an expert on the differences between the definitive edition, the original release on the Wii, the 3DS version, so take this all with a grain of salt. But in my opinion, this game looks pretty good, with a couple caveats. Firstly, and this has been hotly debated in forums on release, but the game is optimized pretty darn well. I can't remember a time when I dropped FPS in-game. It probably happened, but I didn't notice it. Of course, this comes at a cost, and a pretty severe and noticeable cost at that. The game does not look great docked. It runs at a solid 720, which is okay, but it's also 2020, so, you know. I understand that there's Switch performance processor related things. It's excusable to me, just marginally excusable. And it looks even worse handheld, I think is the bigger point. With a dynamic resolution between 378 and 540p. It's really noticeable. And playing handheld is fine. It's just fine. It's not great, but it is what it is. That said, I did take some time to compare some scenes from the Wii to the Switch, and there's no comparison there. Like, when you look at the original game and you compare it to some of the updated models, updated backgrounds, the game looks much better than it used to. So, this is the better version of play, in my opinion. Second, this game's freaking vistas, man. Like, look at this. Look at that. What about this? It's beautiful. Almost everywhere you look, you can appreciate the scale of Xenoblade Chronicles. Everything just looks marvelous. What's even cooler about this is how much it reminds me of the vast exploration and environments in the Dark Souls series. You don't need to be more than an acquaintance of mine to know how much I adore those games. So a grain of salt, but I love them. But I also love how in those games, I can be standing at the entrance of one area and look back behind me to see where I first started, maybe in some instances where the game started, and that's really cool. Xenoblade does the same thing. When you climb up the Mechanis, you can see way back down to where you crash landed from the Sword Valley battle. This is made even more immersive by the fact that you didn't fast travel or black screen into loading screens, you actually walked from point A to point B. This is something that's missing in a lot of games, and it really gives you this intense sense of scope and scale. It's one of the design choices that ramps up the world building. I recognize I'd hit a few load screens or walk through tunnels to do it, but in my mind, I can walk from Colony 9 at the start of the game all the way to Prison Tower, which is a very important location towards the top of the Bionis towards the end of the game. And I can imagine the paths to get there. It actually feels like a journey, and that's pretty epic. Not many games can accomplish this. This does come with a pretty substantial drawback, however, and that's that you just spend so much time walking everywhere. You can fast travel, and thankfully there are many fast travel points, but if you don't seek them out, you'll need to be walking around a lot. Third, and this is a smaller point, but I want to make note that this game does one of my favorite things in games, customizable armor. I feel like every time my wife walks into the room and I'm playing a game, I'm like switching outfits on my characters, like, ooh, what's this helmet look like? Or like, what's this shoulder pad look like? It's probably because one of my earliest RPG experiences was with Morrowind, and I was obsessed with finding the coolest set of armor, mix and match type of thing when I used to play that when I was younger. And obviously, since I'm a Souls gamer, I'm also an avid fashion Souls gamer. In Xenoblade Chronicles, not only do I have multiple shades of armor to choose from, and not only can I use layered armor, like in Monster Hunter, which allows me to basically equip really good armor, but retain the fashionable look of weaker armor sets. But most importantly, and this is super cool, my armor saves to the character and plays through cutscenes. This means when I had Dunban wear glasses, he's kind of like this older brother, he's stuck in his glasses phase through all the cutscenes. It's so funny. I love it. And Xenoblade even takes this a step further. Because it's a game that's so reliant on cutscenes and flashbacks, it takes note of what I wore during poignant sections of the game and keeps those armor pieces equipped during those flashbacks. So I was pretty excited when I realized this was happening, but it adds tremendous points in my book as I reflect on it. Now the section of this video where I might lose people. And you can disagree with me, I'm interested in hearing counterpoints. Xenoblade's gameplay is just... it's old. Let me say first, I'm a classic ATB Final Fantasy guy. I also played KOTOR growing up. I'm no stranger to these kind of delayed gratification, slower paced, hit point sync fights. I've played some great combat systems, and this one, it just drags. When I see an enemy, try to get around behind them to start the battle with a backstab. Battle starts, okay, let's hit him with the break sweep attack to give him the break status. Now Ryan hits him with the topple attack to give him the topple status. Now I hit him with the daze attack. You get the idea. Once they get back up, guess what? I'm gonna hit him with the break. Then Ryan's gonna hit him with the topple. I'm gonna hit him with the daze. They get back up. Break, topple, daze. Break, topple, daze. It's really boring. It actually reminds me a lot of Divinity Original Sin 2. Many fights, at least in my experience, resorted to using crowd control attacks, just like break, topple, daze, repeat to win. And that's fine. I'm glad it's there, but it's repetitive. It's dull. Now, as I mentioned, one really cool feature in the game is that the Monado allows Shulk to view the future and change it. Most games will put this off to cutscenes, but with Shulk, in battle, you can actually see when a teammate will die and how long you have to avoid that future. Now this is really cool. It doesn't make combat that much more interesting because it all sort of feels kind of trivial in the end, but it is a really cool gameplay element that they didn't have to implement into combat, but they did, and I think that's pretty cool. About halfway through the game, I realized combat was such a drag that the only reason I was still playing the game was to close out the story and explore the world. This was also the moment I switched the game to casual mode. I abandoned my get good jeans for my grandpa pants. And I don't think it's fair to offer critique without solution, so I can beat up on the combat system all day, but something that came to mind as I was sitting around writing this, thinking about it, wouldn't the combat be so much more interesting if I could hot swap between characters during combat? Not like swap between combat or get the morale boost attacks, but actually during the heat of combat? I think this would solve all of my problems. It would be more chaotic, yes, and the characters already do an okay job of following up my attacks with well-timed specific abilities, but this would add a lot and take away practically nothing. It would mean I could chain really cool abilities back to back to back, and it would be so much more dynamic. I would be always getting to try different characters' abilities and see really cool abilities that I might not have known were even possible interactions. Maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 2 does this, and to note this, I've personally looked into nothing related to that game. I've had it for a long time because I got it on sale, but I want to play that with hopes of doing a blind run, so as is, the combat system is mediocre. What about the rest of the gameplay? There is such a thing as good and bad side quests. Good side quests include unnamed quests like in Stardew Valley, where you try to build relationships with other villagers and try to figure out their favorite items to gift them the right things. Another good example of a side quest is in Horizon Zero Dawn, where you pull together people from around the world, and at the end of the game they join you in the final battle. Now, arguably those side quests were not super fun to complete. They're all pretty repetitive, but the end result is a pretty neat payoff. Xenoblade sort of offers a cool side quest shown in Rebuilding Colony 6. That's the settlement that was destroyed by a Mechon attack. Admittedly, I didn't partake in this quest because it meant a lot of backtracking and gathering stupid collectibles. I think I could have felt a sense of pride and accomplishment by working through this, but again, remember, I was in the mindset of story first, gameplay second. So assuming other players really like Restoring Colony 6, hopefully, thumbs up, that's a fun, engaging side quest. But for the most part, the side quests in this game kinda suck. Often you'll talk to one individual, get a quest to kill 3 rabbits wearing a hat, then as you walk away, they have another quest. This one is to kill 4 zebras. But they also have to drop a rare item. It's maniacal, honestly. It's the classic MMO bait. Go here, kill these monsters, come back, go here, kill these monsters 8 times each until they drop this really rare item, then come back, go here, but only when it's raining between the times of 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. and kill this monster in the rain and come back. I actually appreciated those a little more because it resulted in fighting unique monsters that were usually gigantic and they had cool drops, but that was more interesting than fighting the typical bread and butter garbage tier monsters, but it still meant I needed to rest for hours and wait for it to be raining. Now surely there's some guide out there to help you determine when it's gonna rain, but come on, is it really worth it to grind all that out? So as you can guess, it wasn't only monotony of combat that made me flip to casual mode, but also the realization that I'd need to grind out side quests, both for money and XP. It's hardly worth fighting monsters for XP in most circumstances, but when it results in quest XP, it's more worth it. So if you're like me and you realize the combat hasn't aged well, I did find a solution. Play half of the game, grind out as many side quests as possible, then at the halfway point, turn on casual mode, focus only on side quests that you'll naturally complete as you play through new areas, such as killing certain monsters or finding certain locations. Also, sell all of your extra items and collectibles. By doing this, I was always able to outfit my characters with the best armor and not have to worry about running out of money or being underleveled. Toward the end of the game, I did run into a few instances where my underleveling screwed me over, but so long as I smacked down some of the higher level monsters, I was able to gradually gain enough XP to stay current with the many boss battles. So to summarize this section of the critique, the combat and the gameplay loop, they're predictable, and I think they're kind of uninteresting. That's a problem. I'd argue it's the worst thing about the game, especially because gameplay is so important to having an enjoyable gaming experience. It's what's going to keep me from replaying it. In fact, it was so bad that I didn't even think about New Game Plus, or the add-on content for Future Connected. And those are almost always things I explore at least for a bit after beating a game, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I actually skimmed cutscenes of Future Connected on YouTube. It was one of those things where I felt really bad halfway through. I was like, oh, I should just play it. but then I saw more combat and I thought, never mind, it's not worth it. But I don't want to call this bad design, because just for me it was a gigantic flop, but I know there's other people out there who disagree and do enjoy it. And I realize boring gameplay can be a sort of hallmark of JRPGs, but it just wasn't fun for me. I know I can't be alone in this. Luckily, the game has so many good things going for it that this is one of those really rare instances where a game with mediocre gameplay can outshine itself in other areas, making it worth playing. The voice acting in Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is actually pretty good. The writing is a little cringy at times. It's not quite Tidus laughing in Final Fantasy X bad, but it does have its moments. There's plenty of scenes that shine and they're awesome, but there's a few lines that for me fell pretty flat. Anyway, the only other note I'll point out is during combat, the characters will just reuse voice lines constantly. If they aren't shouting their attack names like Dragon Ball Z characters, they're repeating the same things over and over and over again after combat. It's fine, it's whatever. But that said, half the reason I was so attached to these characters was hearing their voices. Even though their lines were repetitive in combat, it reminded me that they're living, breathing people in this game. And that reminds me like, oh, these are like characters that I'm going on this journey with. And that brings them to life. I can hear Ryan running his mouth and getting the group into trouble. I can envision Ricky jabbering some weird stuff I don't understand. I can hear Dunban being the voice of reason. And the characters really come to life, and the English voice actors have done an incredible job of bringing each character into reality. Even the over-the-top Cockney-faced mechons are an eye roll, but they do grow on you over time. You'll initially expect these horrific machines not to speak at all. When they do speak, you definitely expected a deep, menacing voice similar to Darth Vader or some kind of calm yet terrifying robotic voice. But instead you get the two goofy pirates from Pirates of the Caribbean.
It's good to see fresh meat on the table.
Hello, Poppy.
But perhaps the shining star of Xenoblade Chronicles is the incredible musical score. You've heard it throughout the video. The music elevates every moment of this game. Familiar tracks play during times of duress or times of victory, and there's a lot of musical tracks in this game. The seriousness of each battle in the Bionis is accentuated by the background music that blasts to life. If your battle is trivial, the violins begin their chorus. If your battle is against a powerful foe, synth and electric guitars squeal the danger. If your battle isn't going well and a party member drops, the music reminds you that the clock is ticking toward your certain destruction. But outside of battle, there are so many sweeping tracks that truly bring the Bionis forward. Guar Plains, likely the most well-known track from the game, is arguably the game's start. It's when you're first introduced to the immense open world of Xenoblade Chronicles. The strings announce the epic tale before you and seem to say, here's our world, now go explore it. Like Christian Bale says about Duke Ellington's track Jeep's Blue.
Who starts a song like that?
It's magic.
For as much crap as I've given significant parts of this game, there's credit to be given to Monolith Software because they didn't have to write both day and night tracks for every segment of the game, but they did. During the day, you'll hear the more bombastic pieces, while at night you'll hear the same music but relaxed, following slower and more peaceful melodies from the daytime tracks. In my opinion, this is one of the most defining features of this game. It's what's going to cement it as an unforgettable experience despite my disagreements with its gameplay. To summarize, I guess I'd say it like this. Instead of giving us a forgettable environment with forgettable enemies, forgettable exploratory elements, Xenoblade Chronicles reminds us of the endless beauty of its world by combining both memorable musical tracks and the themes of nature and ongoing life. And that's the beauty of Xenoblade Chronicles' world. Sure, there are tons of places to explore, and they might not always pay off with more than a hidden boss monster. When I hear a world area track, I can remember that location, the wildlife, where I was, what I was thinking during that particular moment in the story. Personally, I find the battle tracks mostly bland, especially those on the Mechonis, but the ambient environments are a huge win for Xenoblade Chronicles. Like many JRPGs, I've been told by those more fluent in anime and the games they inspire that it's not too uncommon to have a pretty normal story turn into a battle against the gods. It's also pretty normal for these types of games to slather a big bowl of fan service all over the place. I'm still convinced these developers haven't seen or talked to a woman in real life, but it is what it is. The themes that came most to mind for me as I was playing through the game were, in no particular order, religion, nature, racism, tyranny, sexualization, and transhumanism. I won't talk about all these because I don't want to spend another 10 hours editing video, so we'll jump around, but I'd like to talk about the last one first. I'm pretty unfamiliar with the idea of transhumanism, but after some Googling, it seems to be the closest idea to much of what this game exhibits, at least parts of it. Transhumanism, by definition, is the belief or theory that the human race can evolve beyond its current physical and mental limitations, especially by means of science and technology. Certainly for some, this is an idea deeply entrenched, and for others, a passing thought or hope for the future. No, I haven't done a deep dive into the tenets of this philosophical line of thought, and I'm not going to. But from that definition, Xenoblade Chronicles certainly does, and it plays its cards much earlier than you'd think. Early in the game, we are presented with human versus machine. It's the goal of the game after all. Not long after, we are introduced to faced mechons, which have a sort of anthropomorphic face. This is a slight tip of the hat, but shortly after, we also learn these faced mechons can actually talk. For me, the moment I suspected these mechons were hiding something deeper and more sinister was when I started picking up armor sets that transformed parts of my character's bodies into machine parts. It's a bit on the nose, but that was not only the moment when I suspected faced mechon were actually Homs, but it was also the moment I suspected Fiora might actually still be alive. And this suspicion was confirmed later when I saw the white mechon in cutscenes. As we learn later, Fiora is indeed alive, and she has been returned to life as a part Hom, part mechon. In fact, all faced mechons face the same fate. If you've played Nier Automata, you might draw some connections here. In Nier, oh by the way, massive spoilers, you play as androids who pursue the destruction of machine life forms in order to return the Earth to habitability, a place where people can live, for humans to return and live on Earth. It's noble, sure, but as you play, the machines exhibit human-like behaviors, and even the androids seem to show emotion, which they aren't supposed to do. While Nier's sort of auteur creative mastermind Yoko Taro certainly works through many ideas related to transhumanism and Automata, it's linked to his other works as well. And I can't help but wonder if some of the ideas in Automata were inspired by Xenoblade. I'll be honest, I had a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach during most of Automata's cutscenes. Something horrible and existential was lurking around every story beat, and Xenoblade isn't dissimilar. I'm not sure if it's the grating idea of sharp and deadly robotics meshed together with human flesh and organs like some of the bizarre creations in frictional games Soma, or just the dreadful idea of transhumanism taken to the extreme. Regardless, Xenoblade Chronicles carries this idea further. Instead of lingering on the idea of half man, half bot, the game asks the question, okay, in a world where this is the reality, is it possible to coexist? This gets into the ideas of racism and tyranny. Racism isn't at all in the forefront of your mind when Shulk decides to kill all the mechon he can see. After all, they're bots, why do we care? For me, I hadn't even approached the idea of racist themes until first hearing of the game's second megavillain, Egil. We first meet this massive hulk of a faced mechon in the cold wastes of Valak Mountain, on your way to the Mechonis base in Sword Valley. Of course, in classic just a few breadcrumbs please fashion, Egil proudly proclaims that it's not yet time for the party to learn of his plans. Oh yes, evil mastermind, waiting until later to tell us what he's up to. It's not until later that we learn he intends to completely destroy all of the Bionis by reactivating the Mechonis. Then, we also learn Mechonis has denizens that aren't mechon, the Machina, a very peaceful people, but of whom were all betrayed long ago in the past. Egil was among them. If you know the story, and I won't recall all of it, but for those out of the loop, it's worth knowing that both Bionis and Mechonis lived in unity, until an evil known as Zanza consumed notable individuals in the Bionis, ultimately causing a rift and attacking the Mechonis. The long-term plan is for Zanza to rightfully claim himself as a god and destroy/rebuild the world. It's some sort of eternities-long cycle that has to be done and redone over and over again, blah blah blah. This is that JRPG thing I was talking about. The backstory of Zanza, even how he came to exist, is really interesting. Hint hint, he's actually an astronomer scientist in a previous life who ignited a big bang of sorts in his rashness, so he never truly was a god of stars, simply man who made bad choices. And regardless, the point is that the game continues to grow its scope over and over. That's one of the fascinating things about Xenoblade Chronicles. The game's story starts so small. It's a revenge story of a small friend group, but it grows into a bigger story with bigger consequences as each plot point is revealed. So, we were talking about racism, we were talking about tyranny. How do we get back to that? In all instances of racism, There's a fundamental misunderstanding. In Xenoblade, my plan was to wipe Egil off the face of the earth and destroy everything on the Mechonis. But Shulk lacked understanding, and that understanding was that the Machina existed. They were peaceful people. They had no interest in what Egil wanted to do, and that's what changed Shulk's mind. Egil is determined to kill all life on Bionis. He hates Homs, High Entia, all of it has to die. Sure, it's a general disdain for life, but his tyrannical purposes stretch into such hate that he'll do whatever is necessary to wipe them out. Again, he's motivated by revenge because of the betrayal of Zanza, but he misunderstands that not all on Bionis shares Zanza's evil wishes. After a big battle and a heart-to-heart with Shulk, Egil's heart has changed. He can see a future where both societies can live in peace with one another. Sure, it's cookie cutter and not really a great example of how real life works, and ultimately he's also killed before he can achieve that peaceful future. But he does die with renewed purpose. And I find this idea fascinating. Racism, tyranny, oppression, all these things are often built on complete or willful ignorance. It's usually rooted in a misunderstanding. It's valuing oneself higher than others. I see this in myself even, though on a different scale. How easy is it for me to disparage others that are different from me? It could be someone on Reddit with a crappy opinion. I can make a comment about how stupid they are with their stupid opinion, but I do it to elevate myself. What about the homeless guy on the side of the road with a sign? I usually assume they're after drug money. I'm elevating myself. What about when I'm talking with my friends and someone obnoxious comes up in conversation? Yeah, it's super easy to disparage that person if they aren't around to defend themselves. It's very easy to break down the character of those different than we are, and that's a hallmark of social media and the state of our hearts. Whenever we put someone else down, we're raising ourselves up. That's why whenever I hear someone say something like, no, he's a great guy, he's a good friend, but it's always that but that really matters. And it shows me your true intentions. Speaking of butts, Xenoblade has a lot of them. Hey, I'm seeing a lot of good trends in this industry, by the way. I'm seeing heroic, well-clothed female heroes that are strong fighters and have complex emotions and characteristics. They're there for more than just the love interest. They're human beings. And we can see that in games like Tomb Raider, The Last of Us, Horizon Zero Dawn. And I'd argue even Fiora is a good argument here. But man, it's really disheartening to see boob armor and pants that are so impractical. Yeah, this crap works for preteens, and it's a fantasy dreamland for people. I don't have kids yet, but let's face it. What kind of pop culture role models do we want our future kids and future generations to look up to? Of course, kids need powerful examples of dads and moms to look up to in their own families. But kids pay attention to outside sources as well. When I was growing up, it's funny to think about it now, but I looked up to Nelly. I don't know why. I think I just liked his music and whatever. But I also looked up to Master Chief. Here was this masked armored hero who was able to take on the most difficult of situations, killing hordes of aliens, all to save humanity. That to me was heroism, but it made me want to stand up for what was right, and it made me want to be a man. What about women? Well, Halo also features Cortana. Yeah. What about good examples? Well, I know a few women who look up to Mariska Hargitay. How do you say that name? Name pronunciation? Mariska. Okay, let's try this one more time. Well, I know a few women who look up to Mariska Hargitay in her activist work to bring attention to sexual abuse and healing to those men and women affected by terrible, awful predators. And that's great. What about in gaming though? Likely no one looking up to Princess Peach. I often think of Kerrigan from StarCraft and how she goes from a solo experimental stealth fighter to Queen of the Zerg. That's wild. And she governs with brutality and a bit of foolishness. But she's a complex character, despite her ridiculous outfit. When I look at how Melia has to decide how she'll courageously lead her people to fight the Mechon menace head-on, that's heroism. What about Fiora coming to terms with her reality of being half woman, half Mechon? She bravely accepts the presence of Lady Mayneth and pledges to fight for both Hom and Machina alike. She chooses a fate greater than her own individual destiny, and that's honorable. The downside? Look at how they're dressed. It's crazy. I can sometimes understand the reasoning behind dressing up male or female characters sleazy-like, but often it's just an excuse for fan service. I realize that this is just like a cultural thing with this kind of stuff, but what would be the worst thing that could happen if we moved on from this? I hear Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is worse, and for those of you in the know, you probably are laughing right now because it is much worse. But I guess we'll find out soon when I get to it. For now, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition is a good game. I don't consider it a must-play, but I do think it's worth considering it and maybe getting it and playing it. There's a lot to like here visually and from a narrative perspective, but the game just hasn't aged well. There are also a lot of things in the game I didn't talk about here, but listen, this is a massive game, 60 to 80 hours to beat, with a ton of threads. I bet a 4-hour video could cover it all, but there's no time for those things. My hope is that people can pick this game up, dive into it head first, and make up their own minds on what they like and dislike. And hey, that's my hope. That's why I make videos about games. Yeah, they're freaking video games, but my hope is that people don't play games just for entertainment. In my opinion, that's one of the worst things you can do. I play Rainbow Six Siege to enjoy games with my friends and to build relationships and teamwork, but I also play it because it actually stretches my mind and gives me big brain critical thinking opportunities. And I make these videos because if all you do is play these games and then go about your life, I feel you're really missing out on some seriously good stuff. And sure, listen, games are really just there for fun. I understand that. They have their place as time wasters, and there's definitely games that are just there for wasting time. And I definitely enjoy a few of them, and that's okay. But if you finish a big narrative game like this, like Xenoblade Chronicles, and you don't spend any time reflecting on it and what it's about, in my opinion, you're really missing out. So hopefully I've helped you to see more about this game than maybe you saw when you first played it. And I want to close this video by thanking you if you've made it this far. This is, again, my first time doing a critique like this, so I hope people enjoy it. I hope it's useful to people. I'm planning on doing more in the future. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. I have a bunch of video essays, and I also stream on Twitch 3 times a week. I would love to have you stop by. We can talk about this game, you can tell me why I'm wrong, whatever. Finally, check out our Discord. You can also tell me I'm wrong there. But all the links to all those things are in the description below. So stop by, say hi, tell me I'm wrong, and make some new friends. So thanks for watching.